Okay, good morning, Chevra. Um,
Morning, Rabbi gentlemen.
Good morning. We're learning yesterday that if a person finds or is given a book, a sefer, for safekeeping, so then if he's a Talmud Chacham, he may assume that it's okay with the owner for him to go ahead and read from it. Um, and because that's why, Talmidei Chachamim, it's like, you know, not letting them read a sefer that they haven't had access to is cruel and inhuman punishment. So the um, the um, the Imrei Yaakov here brings a very interesting quote from the Ramah that I wanted you to see. Uh, the, um, the the Rav Shulchan Aruch had said that if you know for a fact that the owner does not want people to read the book, let's say he's put a note in the book saying, "Do not read this book," or he's tied it in a certain way, or put a lock on it, or some other kind of indication that he doesn't want this book read. So then, even if it's left in the possession of a Talmud Chacham, he's not allowed to read it. And the Imrei Yaakov just brings over here in Kuf Zayin. He says, "Kain Hushita Sasma." This is the opinion of the Sma, who's a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch. The Kosav Sham, but he writes there the Imtsorar v'Chasam HaSefer Bekesher Mishuneh, that if he ties the book or does some kind of other kind of indication around the book, that he doesn't, that with some unusual kind of seal, the Gila Daito, um, the Kapid Bikriyaso, where he's revealed that he doesn't want people to read it, Az Yadinan Be Devadai Lo Nichale Shiatik Mimenu Va'asr Likros Mitocha. So then it's clear that he doesn't want anyone to copy from it, and you're not allowed to read it. Now, why would a person do that? There could be a number of reasons. Let's say it's a book on Kabbalah, and he's not confident that this work should be uh, exposed to others. Or let's say it's his book, and he's just written it, and he's still needs to go over it and correct it and wants to proofread it before he's prepared to let other people read it. There could be any number of reasons, but the point is that once you've demonstrated to the shomer, to the guard of this book, that you don't want him to read it, no matter how scholarly the scholar is, he's not allowed to read it. And this is therefore called violating the trust by taking something that was given to you for safekeeping and using it for personal use, which is asr. Now the Shach, who's another commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, disagrees with the Sma, and he says that you can't do that to a Talmud Chacham if it's a book on holy teachings, on Torah ideas, then you cannot deprive that information from a Talmud Chacham. And even if the owner says he doesn't want other people to read it, you can't deprive a Talmud Chacham of having access to Torah. Aval ledina ha'ikr kedas asma, but we still paskin like the Sma, and that's why the Rav Shulchan Aruch says, no, once he says he doesn't want you to read it, you have to respect his wishes. Va'al kol panim ein lo hakel yoter midas hayesh omrim shehidi harab lekaman de'im hifkid etzlo stam. He says you should not be more lenient than the opinion that we saw in this halacha that says that if he gave it to you without any indication, then you can assume it's okay to read it, but you cannot take further liberties. And if he tells you explicitly no, you have to respect the no. Umikol makom kasav harama. The Rama does write in the Shulchan Aruch in that sif de b'makom bittul Torah she'ein svarim nimtzaim. Let's say you live in a place where access to Torah books is not readily available. And then there's one guy who has a library in his house where he's got all the new books shipped to his house. So the Ramah says, Yecholim based in Lachov le'echad lahashil sfarav lilmod mehen. The Beis Din of that town has the jurisdiction to coerce the owner of that library to lend his books out to the other people of the town. Uvilvad sheyishalmu lo ma sheyiskalkalu hasfarim ad kam lashano, provided that they do it in a fair way, which is that if any damage is caused to the books, the person who borrowed it and damaged it has to pay for it, right? Just like a library. But essentially, what we're seeing here in halacha is that the Beis Din can actually coerce a community to have a public library.
It's interesting, Rabbi, because I think many people have taken credit for the first public libraries, Carnegie and all these people, but I guess we kind of started it.
Yeah. I mean, the idea goes back to the medieval times of Rav Moshe Isserlis, who's in the 16th century. He's essentially telling us that the Beis Din can coerce an individual who has Sfarim and other people don't have access to Torah study, that they can coerce him to actually, you must lend out your books.
Does that, Rabbi, apply to a shop that sells Torah books?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because then the books become unsellable.
Right.
And then you're going to put the guy out of business.
Yeah.
It's not going to help anybody.
Yeah.
Right. And the fact of the matter is that it's interesting to read about these historical halachas. With the proliferation of the internet, none of these halachas really apply anymore, because we have access. There's a website called Sefaria.org and other websites as well, but Sefaria is probably the biggest right now, where you have an entire library of Sfarim at your fingertips. There's no reason why a person can ever claim, I wasn't able to get a hold of a sefer, so that's why I became an ignoramus, right? There's no excuses anymore. Like, the Gemara says that when people go up to heaven, they won't have the excuse of saying, I was too busy with my assets, or I was too poor, because there's this person and that person that could always show them that even though they were wealthy or poor, they still had time to study Torah. No one's going to have the excuse to say that I didn't have access to Torah in our generation, because everyone has access to Torah in a way that was never available. Information was never available to prior generations like it is to us today. So no Jew can ever claim ignorance based on the lack of availability. That's all I'm saying. And it's quite interesting, because I've gotten, once in a while I'll get an email as the president of the RCA. So an email will come to my inbox from some guy in, I don't know, Bangladesh or some other Muslim third world country, giving me a whole exposition on why I should accept him for conversion, and quoting reams and reams of texts that he's found on the internet. And they're actually legitimate texts, so it's fascinating. It's fascinating, the amount of Torah that's available out there.
Do you convert them, Rabbi?
No, I send them to you, Wayne. So, because you're in Yerushalayim, so no, I'm not going to convert them. I actually do not respond to those kinds of requests. I'm not really in a position to do that. Okay. So, let's see. What was the next halacha that we saw? So, if the owner had originally given permission to a Talmud Chacham to read his books, or had not protested at the beginning, at the outset when he gave him the book, he cannot, in the middle of the guardianship, of the period of guardianship, say, I don't want you to read it. It's already too late. You gave it to me. It's already in my possession. It was under the understanding that I could access the book. And the Imrei Yaakov says, Perish aftahu rashai lachzer bo mehazman shehiskimu shehi b'dehanifkad. What that means is like this. Now, when I leave an object of value in someone's trust, since I'm the owner, I can always come early to reclaim the object, right? The yachol lahaktim v'lakachas es pikdano miyado. I can always come early and say, I know that I told you I was going to be gone for 30 days, but I missed Fluffy too much, so I came back after 2 weeks to pick her up, right? Or I had to come back early, and so I'm here to pick up my pikadon, the object of value that I entrusted with you. But mikol makom im chafetzu sheyishaer od biyad hanifgad. But here we're talking about a case where the owner wishes the guard to continue watching it. Az hu rashai lishtamesh bo af shalom idaita. So then, in that situation, the person who's a Talmid Chacham can continue reading the book for as long as it's in his possession. Mehatam shekasav shekvar zacha bo Talmid Chacham b'sheila zu debevadai nisratza lazeh meikara. And the argument being is that once you left it in my trust and didn't say anything or told me that it's okay for me to read it, you cannot change the terms. So long, let's say it was only in my trust for 2 weeks, and now you say you need me to watch it for an additional 2 weeks. Well, I still have access to that book and I'm allowed to continue reading it. You cannot change the terms of the guardianship in midstream while it's still in my possession. Okay. All right. So let us go on. Chav Zayin. V'chol zeh kishabah hasefer liyado midas ba'alim o b'mitzia. He says, all of the aforementioned, that a Talmid Chacham has a right to read a sefer, is when it came into his hands willfully from the owner, or he's taking care of a lost object. Aval asr leilech lebeis chavero v'likros mitoch sifro shalom mida'ato. But you're not allowed to go over to your friend's house and start reading his books without his consent. And I guess that means when, his friend is not home, just to walk, just to trespass on his property and to read his books, that you're not allowed to do. Afilu ba'akrai, even in a happenstance or occasional fashion, right? Meaning you're not there to spend 2 hours there poring over a book. You just want to look up something in a footnote in the book that you know that he has. You're not allowed to just go over to his house and do that without his consent. Shema hu makpid pen yikalkalenu, because who knows, maybe it's a very rare edition of a book, and he might not want people to open up his book and to potentially damage it. And afal pi shabarilo shelo yikalkalo, and he says, and even if you are confident that you will treat it with the utmost of care, shekol shoel shalomi das ba'olim hu gazlan, because borrowing something from someone else without their knowledge, that's not called borrowing. What do we call that? When you borrow from someone without their knowledge?
Stealing.
It's called stealing, exactly. Av she'eno mafsid klal, even if you're not causing them any financial loss. Ela shebedvar mitzvah min hastam noach leba'olim kisheyodim shelo yagia hefsid lechefetz. He says, here's what we do say in halacha. What we do say in halacha is that we assume that if I can help you do a mitzvah with my property, we assume that I don't mind you using my property, as long as your use will not cause damage to the property. Shaha mitzvah na'aseh bo k'moshen isbar ba'orach chaim simin yudalid, as was explained in Orach Chaim simin yudalid, having to do with the laws of tefillin, where you're allowed to borrow someone's tefillin without their knowledge. Aval kishachoshesh mehefsid he makpidim k'mo b'dvar harishus. But when the owner is fearful that maybe the item will be damaged, so then you have no more right to borrow it than borrowing something that is a non-mitzvah item. Lekach af shebe'emes eno mafsid klal aser k'mo b'dvar harishus. And therefore, since in truth you will end up not damaging his holy writings, but nonetheless you're not allowed to access them without first asking permission. So this is a very controversial halacha, because the question is, does it apply in the modern age of the printing press? Does it apply in today's world where books are so ubiquitous and so affordable and so inexpensive, and the chances of damaging someone's book by by accessing it is very minimal. If anything, there's a greater chance you'll damage someone's tefillin than you will damage someone's book. Remember, in the old days, when most of the books were handwritten, this was a much greater concern, but does it apply nowadays? So let's take a look first at the Imrei Yaakov, and then we'll move a little bit further on from there. So in Kuf Yud, he says, Kuf Yud Aleph, Afilu ba'akrai, even to just do a very quick open and close of the book, just to look up one thing, also you're not allowed to do. Ela imkain yadua lo bibirur shelo yakpid alav balachet. That's unless you know for a fact that the owner doesn't mind. Now, I know that when I go over to someone's house and they have a very rich library, in general, the owner does not mind if a person accesses his books, because that's why their bookshelf is in a very accessible area like the living room or or somewhere else like that, where the guests are free to go without any limitation. So in those kinds of situations, it is perfectly legitimate to go over and pull a book off the bookcase. Because if my friend had a very valuable book that he was worried about people damaging, like a first edition, I can talk about a first edition comic book, but I can also talk about a first edition Sefer, from something from, 500-year-old Sefer that you want to make sure that people are not going to damage. So you're not going to just keep that stam on your bookcase. You're going to probably put that behind glass or put it in plastic and or mylar, and you're going to want to protect it. But stam a book on the bookcase, you don't have to you don't have to worry about that the owner's not going to want you to use it.
Rabbi, sorry to interrupt.
Sure, Alan.
I don't know if I agree with you completely, because some people look after their things, and would appreciate somebody, asking. Like some people are very rough with books. Like you, for example, you gave, just as a comic book, right? Forget about comic books, even Svarim, that some people will handle a book and, like they'll take out a nice safer that you look after and they use their thumb and they're, turning pages and, potentially ripping I'm just saying, like, not everybody cares for things in the same manner. So I would, like, I myself, it's very common in Jewish homes, especially from homes, that the books are in a more public area. I think partly just to show that this is a important part of the house is learning, right?
Right.
So isn't it still appropriate that somebody, like I wouldn't go to somebody's house and just start pulling out books without asking them?
It's interesting that you say that, because I assume that if a person has books on public display, that he wants to share his literature with other people. What do the rest of you say?
I do hear Alan's point, actually, because I think that putting books on display on a shelf might be a form of saying this is who I am, as opposed to feel free to access.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I hold the other side. I mean, if the guy has books, he wants people to look at them. He wants to share them. For one person to buy himself a safer and then not give it to anybody else to read, how selfish can you be?
I think I would agree with you, Alan, if it's a rare book or a one-of-a-kind book, and you have it on a special easel separate from the rest of your books. I would agree with you. Maybe that might be a sign that it's special. But if a guy has a set of Art Scroll Gemaras on his bookcase, on his bookshelf, you still feel that he might not want other people to read those books?
No, I just think it's a common courtesy to ask, like, it doesn't cost you anything. I think it's just proper to ask, oh, you've got the latest, commentary on Bereshit, right? Would you mind if I look at that? Yeah, no problem. As opposed to, Like, I'm going to give you a very quick story. Happened to me in my office. It doesn't have to do with books. I display magazines in my exam rooms. Now it's not as important because of COVID. So I had an occurrence. Some guy comes in. He was looking at a magazine, and as he did this, he turned to me. He ripped out an article and said, "Do you mind if I take this article?" And
Yeah.
I was dumbfounded, and I'm like, "Yeah, I
Please
guess
glue it
not."
back. Yes.
Yeah, no. So I'm just saying, not everybody. Like, if it was a standard, like let's say we were all royalty, we were raised in a manner of extreme manners and to look after things in a proper way, then I would agree with you. But in today's society, like for even an art scroll, like if like I have art scrolls that I look after myself, that I wouldn't say they look like they're never used, but I'm more careful when as opposed to some people are very rough with their items. So if you have somebody who's very rough with your item come in and, they flip pages and it, by accident, they're ripping a little bit of the page, or, they're drinking their coffee and coffee's dripping on page. Like some people just, I'm telling you, are not as, like for me personally, I'd be very upset if somebody just grabbed a book and is haphazardly, damaging the book, even though it's not a rare item. It's nonetheless, it's like it's my item.
I would agree with you when, if a person took a book from my bookshelf and then brought it to the table while we were eating cholent. I think I would agree with you that I might get a little bit uncomfortable. But if he sat on my couch and started just pulled off an art scroll Gemara off the shelf, I don't know. I'd sort of.
But what's the harm in it? It takes 2 seconds. Rabbi, oh, I see you have this interesting. Would you mind if I take it? Of course, Alan, take it for, go ahead.
No. Of course, I understand that the courteous thing to do is to ask in advance, but we're dealing with a halachic issue, which is what are you allowed to assume without asking? That's really the question of the day. What are you allowed?
So that again is my argument is on the halachic level. I can understand if we're living in a time where, like, I can't speak about different eras, but let's say where there is extreme respect for people's property and items. But I think, all I can comment is from what I've observed over many years is different people, there is not a uniform, like the way people handle things.
Well, it could also be that part of the reason is because people view possessions as so inexpensive and disposable today, and replaceable. I mean, when you really think about it, there are very few things that we own that are really very expensive or irreplaceable. The books that we have on our bookshelves, for the most part, what are they going to cost us? $25, $30 a book. And so your friend, a person may figure, well, if I spill coffee on it, I'll just order another one from Amazon for him and replace it for him,
But that's not a good attitude, because there are, for example, I might have books in my library, which, let's say they really have almost no value, but you can't even find them, right?
Yeah, out of print.
And you know what, like, who would want to have a guest? They turn to you after they poured coffee on your book and say, oh, it's not a big deal. I'm just going to replace it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. That's how I feel. Like, I just think it's a common courtesy. And we know, like, I'm sure all of us know people that, like, I'll give you an example. I know you, Rabbi, that if you came to my house and you asked me to read a book, I'm not worried, because I know you well enough that you're going to be sitting eating cholent with my, rare Tom Brady autographed Super Bowl memento, right? I know you're not going to do that. But there are other people who I know personally that I just know the way they dress and the way they just, they don't care about possessions whatsoever.
Right. And they don't have an appreciation for collectibles either.
Correct. So I just know those types of people. I don't want them going under the halakhic assumption that they can just walk into my library and take out whatever they want. So that's my argument, is that I don't think it's a black and white issue.
Okay. All right.
I wonder, Rabbi, whether we draw a distinction between a coffee table book, which is out there and just like pick it up and use it, and actually physically going to a shelf and pulling something down without asking.
Yeah, it's a good argument. I think certainly a coffee table book that's put right there in front of your guests. There's even
Yeah, that I would agree. Paul, I agree with you that there are certain things that you would have like on a coffee table, like, something like views of Israel, like I have in my house, like the Rocky Mountains, different pictures, from the sky of Israel. I agree.
Okay. So let's read a little bit of text from the Imrei Yaakov.
Certainly after that conversation, I think we'd rather be at your house than Alan's, Rabbi.
Yeah, but
I guess, Wayne, that's one for the books, is it?
His wife's a great cook, though. Shema hu makbid ben yikalkalenu. So you have to be concerned that, your reason why you're not allowed to just borrow your friend's book without his permission is because maybe he doesn't want you to damage it, like Alan Mall, right? Va'afte kaimelan demutter lital talis u'tfilin shel chaver lefi sha'a v'lo chashiv shalom midas. Now, we also paskin in Shulchan Aruch, and maybe we'll look that up tomorrow. We paskin in Shulchan Aruch that if I go to shul one day and I forgot my talis and tefillin, and I know that my friend already davened in the earlier minyan, or that let's say he's in Florida and he keeps a pair of tefillin in the shul, I don't have to ask him permission. I can just borrow them. Did you know that there's such a halacha that you're allowed to borrow your friend's tefillin without his permission? He says, "Shiny hasam delekach shashel kilui karna." He says it's different over there because we're not concerned that you're going to actually damage the property. Through normal use of you putting the talis on and putting the tefillin on. All right, so Alan, let me ask you, how do you feel about that?
I was just about to comment.
I know that you're in Israel later in the month, and I may forget my talis and tefillin, and I don't bother asking you, but I notice you keep your spare pair of tefillin in the shul, and I figure, it's my mechutin. I know that he doesn't care. I'm going to go put on his tefillin. So what do you say, Alan?
So under normal conditions, I would say zero issue, but I'll tell you, especially with COVID right now, let's give a different scenario where you went to the 6:30 minyan, you borrowed my tefillin, and then, you didn't tell anybody, but you've got COVID, and now I'm coming and I'm handling the same tefillin, so you could pass COVID. So things are different.
Okay. All right. So
it's a different scenario now.
What would you say in a non-COVID era?
No, in a non-COVID era, absolutely no problem.
Okay. And we say v'amrinan, nichale leinish deliyavdi mitzvah v'mamone. And the argument being is that we assume, and this is what the Shulchan Aruch writes, we'll look that up tomorrow, is that people are happy to have their property used for someone else's mitzvah. That's the assumption. But ma she'ein kein b'sfarim asur afilu ba'akrai. But Sfarim are different, even looking at them only on a casual basis. D'shema yavo likros behem harbe ad sheyikara merov mishmush. Because a person may get so engrossed in a book that he may end up tearing a page out of his fascination with the information or so forth. Inami, alternatively, mishum deshchiach viraga lihikara lihitkalkel. Alternatively, books are not as sturdy as tefillin and talesim. Tefillin and talesim are more sturdy; they're less likely to be damaged, whereas books, are more fragile by definition because they're made up of individual pages, and therefore they can easily get torn. Okay, we're going to hold it here for today. We'll continue this Imrei Yaakov, and we'll look up the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch as well. All right? So, nice discussion. Have a